Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m. with that feeling something's watching you? That moment when your heart starts racing because you heard a noise that shouldn't be there? When you're absolutely sure you're alone, but you're not? Maybe it was just your house settling. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks on your eyes. Or maybe you noticed something that wasn't supposed to be noticed. What I'm about to share with you isn't made up. These aren't internet stories or urban legends. These are real experiences from real people who saw things they can't explain. Things that changed how they see the world. Things that still keep them up at night. Some of them never reported what happened. Some tried to tell others but weren't believed. And some are still dealing with what followed them home. Before we begin, you might want to turn on another light. Check that dark corner of your room. Make sure your doors are locked. Because after hearing these stories, you'll start noticing things. Little things at first. A shadow that moves wrong. A sound that shouldn't be there. A feeling of being watched. And once you notice them, they notice you too. The Thing in the Basement. Let me tell you about Amy Wilson, a 27-year-old child doctor who moved her office into an old house in Portland. Just divorced and starting her own practice, she thought the fixed-up basement would be perfect for helping kids. She didn't know something had been down there for years, listening, feeding on children's fears. Here's Amy's scary story in her own words. The house seemed perfect. Tall ceilings, beautiful old wood, and a basement that someone had turned into a nice office space. The rent was surprisingly low for the neighborhood, but I thought it was because of all the construction on the street. The old landlord, Jerry, seemed weirdly happy to rent to someone who helped kids. "Kids' voices," he said, stopping mid-sentence with a strange look. "The house likes kids' voices." I should have asked more questions about what he meant. Should have asked why 3 other kid doctors had broken their leases early. Should have wondered why neighborhood kids never played near the house. The first weird thing happened during my first session with Emma, a 6-year-old dealing with worry after her parents split up. She was drawing, like all my young patients did, when she suddenly stopped and tilted her head like she heard something. "The crayon man wants me to draw it different," she said, switching from bright colors to black. "He says to show you what I'm really scared of." When I asked who the crayon man was, she pointed to the empty corner between my file cabinet and the wall. "He lives in there, in the secret place. He keeps all the scary drawings." I thought it was just a kid's imagination. But then every child started talking about the crayon man. 7-year-old Tommy said he whispered ideas during our talks. 9-year-old Sarah said he wrote notes in my files when I wasn't looking. 4-year-old Marcus wouldn't draw at all, saying, "He makes the pictures move after we finish them." Then my patient files started changing. Small notes appeared in the margins, written in crayon. "He's lying about his bad dreams. She knows what really happened that night. They're all broken in such pretty ways." At first, I thought one of the kids had snuck a peek at their file during a session. I was wrong. The drawings started changing too. Every kid, no matter how old or how good at art they were, began drawing the same thing. A dark figure with too many arms, crouching in a corner, surrounded by floating papers and broken crayons. They called it different names. The crayon man, the paper friend, the watching shadow. But the pictures were exactly the same. I started hearing movements in the walls during sessions. Soft at first, like paper sliding against pipes. Then scratching, getting louder each week. The sound of crayons drawing on paper when nobody was drawing. Tommy said it was the crayon man writing down our secrets. The room would get super cold during emotional moments in therapy. When children cried, the air would get so cold we could see our breath. Several times, I saw crayon marks appear by themselves on blank paper, making words and pictures before quickly disappearing. One evening, after my last patient left, I heard crying from behind my file cabinet. Not grown-up crying, the heartbreaking sobs of a child. When I moved the cabinet, I found something impossible. A crayon drawing on the wall that wasn't there before, showing my office with stick figures of my patients. Behind each one was a dark, skinny figure, its long arms reaching for them. The crying got louder, seeming to come from inside the wall itself. That's when I noticed the baseboards looked wrong. They didn't match the rest of the room's wood. When I pushed on them, they moved, showing a hidden crawl space. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, going back years based on how yellow and old some were. All kids' drawings, showing their deepest fears, their darkest secrets, their worst hurts. Some were dated back to the 1940s when the house first became a doctor's office. But these weren't normal drawings. They moved when you looked at them too long. The crayon lines shifted, showing the fears playing out over and over. A kid's drawing of a mean parent would come alive, the stick figure violence happening again and again. Pictures of monsters under beds showed the creatures slowly crawling out night after night. That's when I heard something moving in the dark of the crawl space, something big. The sound of paper rustling and crayon scratching got louder, and a voice, like a kid trying to sound like a grown-up, whispered, "Dr. Amy, I've been taking notes on all of them. All the broken little ones. Want to see my files?" My phone's flashlight caught movement deeper in the crawl space. Something was unfolding from the shadows, a shape that looked made of crumpled paper and broken crayons, its body impossibly thin and bent wrong. When it moved, I could hear paper rustling and wax scratching against wood. "I've been helping," it said, its voice switching between kid and adult sounds. "Writing down all their secrets, all their fears. They taste better when they're fresh." The thing held up what looked like a kid's drawing, but as I watched, the crayon lines began to move, making new pictures. I knew what I was seeing. It was Tommy's session from earlier that day, but drawn from behind his chair, from where the thing had been watching. "Your notes miss so much," it said, pulling out more drawings. "You only see what they're willing to tell you. But I see everything, every nightmare, every hidden hurt, every quiet scream." Its paper-thin fingers flipped through drawings fast, showing things that couldn't be real. My patients in their homes, in their schools, in places they'd never talked about in therapy. The dark figure was always there, its arms getting longer in each picture, reaching closer. "They're all so good to eat," it whispered. "Their little broken pieces, their secret hurts. I've been eating them for so long, since before this was your office, since before the house was built. The kids always know I'm here, but the grown-ups, they never believe them." The walls of the crawl space started moving, showing more drawings hidden under the surface. I saw kids in old-fashioned clothes, in styles from every decade, all in therapy, all with their own versions of the crayon man watching them. "Each time period's fears taste different," it said, moving closer. Its face was a mess of crayon marks that kept making different looks. The 1950s tasted like worry about bombs and spies. The 1980s like fear of strangers taking kids. Now they taste like school shootings and the earth dying. But the personal fears, those are always the sweetest. It reached for me with arms that kept getting longer and longer like streams of dark wax. "Want to taste them too, Dr. Amy? Want to know what your patients really dream about?" The drawings on the walls were all moving now, each one showing its scene of childhood fear over and over. The air was thick with the sound of kids crying across decades. "Let me show you my special files," it said, its voice now a mix of all my patients speaking together. "The ones I keep in the deep dark, the ones that show what happens to kids who tell too many secrets." Its crayon-stained fingers grabbed my ankle, pulling me deeper into the crawl space. The walls were alive with moving drawings now, showing things I can't describe. The worst fears of kids across generations playing out over and over. "Fear is art," it rasped, more arms growing from its paper-thin body. "And kids are the best artists. Their fears are so pure, so bright. Grown-ups think too much. But kids, they feel everything completely." The thing showed me how it had shaped this house over years. Every kid doctor who rented the office had fed it without knowing, each child's session adding to what it collected. The worse the hurt, the more it fed. It had become a keeper of suffering, a collector of kids' nightmares. But now I need more, it said. A grown-up's view, a doctor's knowledge, someone to help sort all these beautiful fears. That's when I saw them. The missing kids. Not many, maybe 1 or 2 every 10 years, but their drawings were different. They moved more wildly, showed more detail. These were the ones who had seen too much, who had started to understand what the Crayon Man really was. They're part of my forever collection now, it said, pointing to a dark corner where I could see small shapes huddled, their bodies partly turned to paper and wax. Still drawing, still feeling, still feeding me their fears forever. That's when I noticed something about the oldest drawings, the ones from the 1940s. They were different. The kids in those pictures weren't just showing their fears, they were fighting back. The crayon lines showed ways to protect yourself, special symbols, ways to trap the creature. The first kid doctor here, Dr. Eleanor Wright, hadn't just been helping kids with their problems. She'd been teaching them how to fight the Crayon Man. Her notes, hidden in the corners of the oldest drawings, showed she knew what it was. Something that ate fear, that collected nightmares, that had existed as long as kids had fears to feed it. But she'd also found its weakness. The thing couldn't eat hope, couldn't swallow drawings filled with light and brave thoughts. Each happy picture was like poison to it. The thing must have felt me figuring it out. Its paper skin crinkled as it pulled back. "Those are just failed pictures," it hissed. "Useless scribbles. Let me show you the real art." But now I understood why my office always had bright colors, why the other doctors had pushed kids to draw happy scenes. Each one had found part of the truth, had tried to fight back in their own way. I grabbed every bright crayon I could find. The thing laughed, a sound like paper tearing. "You can't think!" I cut it off by starting to draw. Right there on its wall of horrors, I began drawing what I'd seen in every therapy session, but had been too blind to notice. The moments kids got better, got stronger, beat their fears. The thing screamed, its body starting to fold in on itself. The moving drawings on the walls began to slow down, their endless scary loops breaking apart. "Stop!" it shrieked, its many arms waving. "You're ruining my collection!" But I didn't stop. I drew every time I'd seen a kid face their fears and win. With each new picture, the thing got smaller, its paper body crumpling up. But winning came with a price. As the creature shrank, all its collected fears didn't just disappear. They had to go somewhere. They poured into the closest living thing, me. I felt them all at once. Every kid's nightmare, every hidden hurt, every dark secret the Crayon Man had collected over decades. My mind filled with images no one should have to see, feelings no one should have to feel. The thing tried one last time to save itself. "We could share them," it offered, its voice now small and scared. "All these beautiful fears. You could know exactly what hurts your patients. See every fear they're afraid to tell you." For a moment, I was tempted. As a kid doctor, imagine knowing exactly what scared your patients, being able to see their fears firsthand. But that would make me no better than the thing I was fighting. "No," I said, and drew one last picture, a kid laughing, free from fear. The thing collapsed completely, its paper body turning to dust, its broken crayons crumbling away. The walls of drawings began falling off, showing normal basement walls underneath. In the corner where it kept its forever collection, I found old files, the real ones, showing what had happened to those missing kids over the years. But I wasn't free. I'm still not. The fears it collected live in my head now. Every night I dream their nightmares. Every day I see the world through scared eyes. I can't look at a playground without seeing every bad thing that could happen, every danger hiding in fun games. Can't walk past a school without feeling waves of worry and fear. My own drawings have changed. Everything I try to draw starts happy, but twists into something dark. Crayons break in my hands. Paper cuts appear on my fingers in patterns that look like tiny screaming faces. Sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching in my walls. Not the thing, I destroyed it completely, but echoes of its collection, reaching out from inside my mind. The fears need somewhere to go, some way to get out. I've started my own collection of drawings, not of fears, never of fears, but of healing, of hope, of getting better. Every bright picture is like a shield against the darkness in my mind. Every happy scene helps wash away the horrors I took in. But the kids, they still know something's different about me. In therapy sessions, they look at me the way they used to look at the corner. Because they can sense it, all their friends' fears, all those years of nightmares swirling behind my eyes. "You see them too now, don't you?" little Tommy asked in our last session. "All the scary things. You're like the crayon man now. But better, because you help us fight them." He's right. I do see them. All of them. And I'll carry this weight, hold these nightmares, so those kids don't have to. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my office, I catch myself reaching for the black crayons first. The empty apartment. Let me tell you about Jessica Chen, a 25-year-old graphic designer who just landed her dream job in Seattle. After months of couch surfing and searching, she found a too-good-to-be-true deal at the Riverside Apartments, a beautiful old building with a dark secret about what happens to its residents. Here's Jessica's terrifying story in her own words. Anyone who's tried to find an apartment in Seattle knows it's nearly impossible to get something decent without 5 roommates or selling a kidney. So when I found a 1-bedroom at Riverside for half the normal rent, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The building was gorgeous, all red brick and fancy old trim, with big windows and high ceilings. But something felt off from the start. During the tour, my landlord, Mr. White, kept talking about the community and how everyone here fits in perfectly. "We're very particular about who we accept," he said, checking something off on his clipboard. "But you'll do nicely. You have the right qualities." I should have asked what he meant. Should have wondered why he measured my height and took photos from every angle. Should have asked why all the other tenants I passed in the halls looked so similar. My first week was quiet. Too quiet. No TV sounds through the walls. No footsteps above. No cooking smells from next door. Just perfect, empty silence. Then I met my neighbor, Sarah from 4B. She was nice, but something about her seemed practiced, like she was reading from a script. The next day, I met Sarah from 4D. She looked exactly like Sarah from 4B. Same height, same hair, same smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, we're not related," they both said, with the exact same laugh. Just one of those funny coincidences. But it wasn't just the Sarahs. Every floor had a mic in apartment A, all with the same glasses and the same way of tilting their head when they talked. Every C apartment had a Linda who always carried grocery bags, even though I never saw them come in from outside. I started taking pictures on my phone, comparing them. Same faces, same clothes, same movements. Like someone had copied and pasted people throughout the building. The weirdest part? Nobody else seemed to notice. When I mentioned it to Mike from 2A, he just smiled that same practice smile and said, "We all just have similar taste here. It's why we fit in so well." Then the noises started. Not normal apartment noises. No pipes or creaks or footsteps. Instead, I'd hear what sounded like a printer running in the walls at night. A big industrial one, with that whirring clicking sound. And sometimes, a wet sort of plop, like something soft hitting the floor. One night, I saw something through my peephole that changed everything. It was 3 a.m., and I heard that printer sound right outside my door. Through the peephole, I watched a new Sarah being made. She formed like a 3D print, layer by layer, starting with feet and moving up. When it got to her face, her eyes opened while they were still being printed, looking right at me through the peephole. I stopped sleeping after that, started watching more closely. Notice things. How the mics would sometimes glitch, their movements skipping like bad video. How the Lindas always carried the same exact groceries, down to the banana poking out of the bag. How none of them ever seemed to eat, or sleep, or leave the building. The basement door was always locked, but one night I followed Linda from 3C when she went down there. She didn't use a key, her hand just sort of melted into the lock. I caught the door before it closed. What I found down there, I still have nightmares about it. The basement was one huge room filled with what looked like rejected prints. Hundreds of unfinished bodies stacked like mannequins. Some were missing parts. Others had extra limbs or repeated features. 3 eyes, 2 mouths, all had that same perfect smile. In the corner stood a massive printer, but not like any I'd ever seen. It was more organic, like a cross between a machine and something alive. Its parts pulsed and moved like they were breathing. Tubes ran from it into the ceiling, carrying something thick and flesh-colored. That's when I noticed the smell, like plastic and meat mixed together. And the sound, that whirring clicking I'd been hearing through my walls, but louder. Much louder. "Do you like our printing room?" I spun around to find Mr. White standing there. Except he wasn't standing. His lower half was still being printed, connected to the machine by strands of that flesh-colored material. "We had such high hopes for you, Jessica," he said, his smile too wide for his face. "Your measurements were perfect. We could have made hundreds of copies from your template." Behind him, I saw movement. All the rejected prints were starting to move, their incomplete bodies jerking to life, reaching for me with half-formed hands. "You see," Mr. White said, his body still printing, "we need fresh templates. The old ones degrade after too many copies, start to glitch. That's why we're always looking for new residents, new patterns to print." The rejects were getting closer, moving in that jerky, broken way. Some crawled on too many legs, others slithered, leaving trails of that flesh-colored stuff. All had those same perfect smiles, even on their unfinished faces. "Don't worry," Mr. White said. "The scanning process is almost painless, and think how useful you'll be. A Jessica in every apartment building. Hundreds of you, all perfect copies, all fitting in perfectly." I ran. Behind me, I heard the whirring clicking speed up and Mr. White's voice calling out, "You can't leave, Jessica. Your lease isn't up, and we've already started your prints." I made it to the stairs, but when I looked back, I saw something horrible. Thin tubes were snaking out of the walls, carrying that flesh-colored stuff. Where they touched the floor, new bodies started forming. Copies of me, building up layer by layer. The first copy opened its eyes while its body was still forming. "Stay," it said with my voice. "We're going to be such good neighbors." I got to my apartment and started throwing things in a bag. But when I opened my door to leave, I found the hallway filled with copies of me in various stages of completion. Some just shapes, others almost perfect. All reaching for me, all smiling that same wrong smile. I slammed the door, but they started oozing under it. Half-formed versions of my own body squeezing through the crack like melted plastic. My phone wasn't working. When I tried to call 911, I just heard that whirring clicking sound through the speaker. The windows were my only chance. I was on the 4th floor, but there was a fire escape. As I climbed out, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In every window of the building across the street, people stood watching, all identical, all with that same perfect smile. The fire escape creaked under my weight. Behind me, I heard my own voice multiplied dozens of times. "Where are you going, Jessica? Don't you want to be part of the community?" I looked down and almost fell. More copies were forming on the metal stairs below me, rising up from that flesh-colored goo that was now dripping down the building's walls. Each one looked more finished than the last. The one nearest to me reached out with a hand that wasn't quite solid yet. "We can be everywhere," it said. "Every apartment, every office, every home. No more loneliness. No more not fitting in." I jumped the last flight of stairs and ran. Behind me, the whirring clicking sound got louder, like the whole building was one big printer. When I looked back, I saw copies of me pouring out of every door and window, their bodies still forming as they moved. Made it to my car, but the key wouldn't work. Through the window, I saw my steering wheel was made of that flesh-colored stuff, starting to form into another copy of my face. I ran until my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, I was in a different part of the city. Found a cheap motel that took cash. But when I looked in the mirror that night, I saw something that made me scream. My reflection moved a half-second too late, and when I touched my skin, it felt softer than it should, like it wasn't quite solid. The next day, I started researching, found stories about other buildings, all owned by something called Community Living Solutions, all with perfect, quiet residents who looked exactly alike, all with basements that no one ever came out of. I tried going to the police, but the officer at the desk had that same perfect smile. When I turned to run, I saw 3 more identical officers coming in, all moving with that slightly jerky motion. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't stayed in one place since then, but they're spreading. Every day I see more of them. Perfect copies walking down streets, identical families in parks, whole office buildings where everyone has the same face. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving wrong. My skin feels softer every day. And last night, I heard it, that whirring clicking sound coming from inside my own body. This morning I found a letter in my handwriting that I don't remember writing. Welcome to the community. Printing starts soon. My fingers are starting to feel soft, like melting plastic. When I touch things, they leave traces of flesh-colored goo. And sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, I find myself practicing that perfect smile in the mirror. Yesterday, I got an email from an anonymous address. Inside was a video from a security camera in Riverside's basement, dated 1986. It showed the first printer, not a machine at all, but something that crawled out of a hole in the wall. Something that learned to copy humans by watching us. Something that's been spreading ever since, one building at a time. The video showed its real form, just for a second, like a massive blob of that flesh-colored stuff, but with thousands of molds inside it, all shaped like people, all slowly filling up and printing out copies. But here's the worst part. I found a hidden file attached to the email, records going back to the 1980s. Turns out Riverside wasn't the first building. There was something called Project Community, a government try at making perfect citizens. But what they made was too perfect, too good at copying itself. Now it's everywhere. Those identical office workers you pass on the street, the neighbors who never seem to leave their houses, that new family that looks just a bit too perfect. They're all prints, all copies, all part of the community. This morning, my teeth started feeling soft. When I brushed them, they left smears of flesh-colored paste on my toothbrush. My bones make that whirring clicking sound when I move, and every time I check my phone, all my photos have changed, showing the same perfect smile over and over. I'm writing this as a warning. If you find an apartment that's too good to be true, run. If your neighbors start looking too similar, run. If you hear printing sounds in your walls at night, it's already too late. I can feel it starting. The printing. It begins in your bones. They turn soft first. Then your organs start to copy themselves. Finally, your skin becomes a mold, ready to print a new copy. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep writing. My fingers keep melting into the keyboard. But you need to know the truth about what they're planning, what the community really wants. It's not just about making copies. They're printing a new world, one person at a time. Each copy helps make more copies. Each building spreads to another building, like a printer that never stops, making everything and everyone exactly the same. Last night, I broke into another community building. Found something worse than the printing room, a planning room. The walls were covered with maps showing their spread. Red dots for completed buildings, blue dots for buildings in progress, black dots for their next targets. The whole map was nearly red. But that's not the worst part. In the center of the room was a model of what they're calling perfect community. Their final goal. A world where everything is printed, where every person is a perfect copy, where even the buildings and streets and trees are all printed, all identical, all part of one giant printing system. They're not just copying people anymore. They're printing reality itself. I found photos from cities where they've almost finished. Neighborhoods where every house is exactly alike, where even the grass and trees are made of that flesh-colored stuff. Places where the sky looks printed, where the sun rises and sets in perfect loops, like a screensaver. I'm changing faster now. My body feels like wet clay. When I touch things, they start to change too, turning soft, ready to be reshaped. The community is calling me. I can hear them all, thousands of identical voices in my head, showing me how perfect everything will be. This morning, I passed a construction site. The concrete they were pouring looked just like that flesh-colored goo. The steel beams were pulsing like veins. Even the dirt was starting to look printed. If you're reading this, look closely at your world, at the new buildings going up in your city, at the perfect families moving in next door, at your own reflection. Are your bones still hard? Is your skin still real? When you smile, is it your smile or the community's? I have to stop now. The printing is almost complete. But remember, if you find an apartment that's too good to be true, if your neighbors all look the same, if you hear printing sounds in your walls, they're coming to make you a perfect copy too. The night shift nurse. Let me tell you about Rachel Martinez, a 28-year-old nurse who took the night shift at Oakwood Memorial Hospital's long-term care ward. The pay was better at night, and after her divorce, she needed the money. But on her first week, she learned why none of the other nurses would work past midnight on the 4th floor. Here's Rachel's terrifying story in her own words. Every hospital feels different at night. The halls get longer, the shadows deeper, the beeping of machines more noticeable. But Oakwood's 4th floor was different. Even during the day, something felt wrong up there, like the air was too heavy, like something was watching from the corners. "You'll get used to it," my supervisor said during training. "Just don't look too long at the shadows. And if patients start talking about the night doctor, call for backup right away." I should have asked more questions, should have wondered why room 414 was always ice cold, even in summer, should have asked why they kept that room's security camera pointed at the ceiling. My first week was quiet enough, just the usual stuff. Giving meds, checking vitals, helping patients who couldn't sleep. But I noticed things, like how all the patients would stare at the same empty corners, how they'd stop talking mid-sentence when shadows passed by their doors. Then I met the night doctor. I was checking on Mrs. Sullivan in 412. She had late-stage cancer, wasn't expected to make it through the month. Found her talking to someone in the dark corner of her room. When I turned on the light, nobody was there. "Oh, you just missed him," she said, smiling more peacefully than I'd ever seen. "The night doctor. He makes the pain go away, says it won't be long now." That night, Mrs. Sullivan passed away, but something was strange. Her face looked younger somehow. All the pain lines were gone, and on her arm was a mark I'd never seen before, like a doctor's signature, but written in shadows. I tried showing it to the day staff, but by morning the mark had disappeared. More patients started talking about the night doctor. Mr. Chen in 410 said he came every night at 3 a.m., checking charts that were written in darkness. Old Mrs. Peterson in 416 said he did rounds with nurses no one else could see, their footsteps making no sound on the floor. Then the marks started appearing on more patients, shadow signatures, always in different places, wrists, necks, foreheads. Those who got them never seemed afraid anymore. They'd smile at empty corners, wave at shadows that shouldn't be there. One night, I found Billy, an 8-year-old with terminal leukemia, laughing in his room at 3 a.m. "The night doctor's telling jokes," he said. "He says I won't be sick much longer. Look, He gave me a special band-aid. There was a shadow mark on his chest, right over his heart. Billy passed away the next night, smiling in his sleep. I started keeping track. Every patient marked by the night doctor died within days, but they never suffered, never seemed scared. They'd just fall asleep with peaceful smiles and never wake up. Then I saw him myself. It was 3 a.m. doing my rounds. The hallway lights started flickering, then went out completely. In the darkness, I heard footsteps, the soft squeak of hospital shoes on tile, coming closer. But they sounded wrong, like they were walking on a different floor than the one I was standing on. Then I saw him at the end of the hall. He looked like a doctor's shadow come to life. Tall, wearing an old-fashioned white coat that moved like smoke. Where his face should have been was just deeper shadow, except for his eyes. They glowed like fading monitor lights. He was checking a chart that seemed to be made of darkness, writing with a pen that leaked shadows instead of ink. When he looked up at me, all the machines on the floor stopped beeping at once. "Nurse Martinez," he said, his voice like whispers in an empty room. "We've been short-staffed in the night ward. So many souls to ease, so little time." He held out his chart to me. The pages were filled with names written in shifting shadows, all my patients' names, with dates next to them, future dates, death dates. "Would you like to help?" he asked. "It's so much easier for them when they have a nurse they trust to help them cross." Behind him, I saw other nurses stepping out of the shadows. Their uniforms were from different eras, 1950s caps, 1970s shoes, modern scrubs, all of them slightly transparent, all with those same glowing eyes. "We've been watching you," the night doctor said. "You care about them, really care. Not just their bodies, but their fears, their pain, their lonely nights. That's why we chose you." The shadow nurses moved closer. I could see their name tags now, nurses who'd worked at Oakwood over the decades. Some I recognized from old photos in the break room. Others had wings pinned to their uniforms marking 50 years of service that apparently didn't end with death. "It's not about keeping them alive," he continued, his pen dripping shadow ink onto the floor. "It's about helping them let go, making the transition peaceful. Some need a joke, others need a hand to hold, all need someone to walk with them to the door." He pointed down the hall. Where room 414 should have been, I saw a door I'd never noticed before. It was made of the same shadows as the night doctor, and under it came a soft light. Not bright, but warm and welcoming. "That's where we take them," one of the shadow nurses said. Her uniform was from the 1960s. "Through the gentle door, away from the pain." "But they need living nurses too," another added. Her 1980s scrubs moved like smoke. "Someone to give the medicine that eases the body while we ease the soul." The night doctor held out his pen to me. "Will you join our rounds?" I should have run, should have quit right there. But all I could think about was Billy's laugh when the night doctor told him jokes. Mrs. Sullivan's peaceful smile. All those patients facing their last moments without fear. I took the pen. The moment I touched it, the world changed. I could see what they saw now. The thin barrier between life and death, like a dark curtain hanging in every room. Could see the light behind it, waiting. Could see how close each patient was to crossing over, their bodies glowing dimmer or brighter. "Welcome to night rounds," the night doctor said. "Let me show you how to read the true charts." The shadow charts showed more than just death dates. They showed what each patient needed for a peaceful passing. Mr. Rodriguez in 415 needed to hear his favorite song one last time. Ms. Thompson in 411 needed someone to promise to care for her cat. Little Sarah in 417 needed her stuffed giraffe and a story about heaven having ice cream. But with this new sight came a price. I started seeing death everywhere, not just in the hospital. At the grocery store, I could see how many days people had left, glowing numbers floating above their heads. On the street, I could tell who was closer to the door, their bodies more transparent than others. The shadow nurses taught me their ways. How to smooth the curtain between worlds to make crossing easier. How to whisper comfort that both the living and dying could hear. How to leave our special marks, not to claim souls, but to promise them a gentle passing. Before you click away, drop a comment below if you've ever experienced anything like this. Have you seen shadows move when they shouldn't? Heard sounds that can't be explained? Found something that seemed wrong somehow? Your story could be featured in our next video. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell if you want more true scary stories. Join our growing community of people who've seen things they can't explain. Share your experiences. Connect with others who've witnessed the unexplained. Until next time, keep your lights on.